I want to say, first of all, thank you to the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which organizes this event and co-sponsors it, along with Electra Street, which is the Journal of Arts and Humanities, which is published out of NYU Abu Dhabi. Electra Street is electrastreet.net, and we write about art, culture, thought, photography, film, sort of the cultural life of Abu Dhabi. Which you all, by virtue of being here, you know that there is a cultural life in Abu Dhabi besides the mall. So we are proof that it exists, right? So first, our speakers, and they're going to talk in the order that they're seated. Our first speaker is Joanne Bowie, who is a second-year sophomore at NYU Abu Dhabi. She's a literature major. Yay! And she's going to talk to us a little bit about American Granddaughter, I think in light of sort of war fiction a little bit, yeah? Our second speaker is Salwa Mikdadi, who is a professor of art history here, whose specialization is modern art of the Arab world, or modern Arabic art. Yes, and also works with museum studies and with the museums that are working to open on Saadiyat. And our third speaker is Professor Cyrus Patel, who is a professor of literature here at NYU Abu Dhabi, and we'll be talking a little bit about some of the ideas that he finds in American Granddaughter. So they're each going to say a few words, then we will open it up to discussion. And at the end of our evening, you'll see behind you, there will be some light refreshments. And so we hope that our discussion will spill over to people sitting and eating and talking about books. So thank you. Joey, do you want to get us started?
Yep.
You can just...
Okay. This works. Hi, I'm Joey. I wanted to talk about, in the context of this novel, the problems in writing about war. So I got the idea from one of my favorite short stories by Tim O'Brien, How to Tell a True War Story. Because war stories have been told for so long and so many times over, you pick up on some tendencies to glorify it or dramatize it. And so the question becomes, how can you tell a war story authentically or truthfully, if those are the same things? I think that's one of the problems that the narrator, Zeina, is that how you say her name? Zeina deals with, because in the book, sometimes she's just talking in first person, but sometimes she refers to the writer, and she seems to have, or the author, and she has this struggle with the author. She's very angry about her, and they seem to be struggling with each other, and sometimes she characterizes the author as someone who wants to dramatize her story in Iraq, but at other times, maybe the author is the only person that could tell the war story truthfully and objectively, like when Zeina goes to see her grandmother and brings the army soldiers with her. But then I also think it becomes more complicated because I think Zeina's personality already inherently tries to dramatize every situation she comes across, not just as an author, but as a person. Like every new situation she comes into, she thinks, what would the movie title of this scene be called? And so then that makes me think, maybe you can't help dramatizing any story, especially war, or maybe it's a coping mechanism for Zeina. So is what I was thinking about.
Well, I had a different view of the book. I looked at it as very, you would think it's going to be about war and the bloody war and the very dark side of what happened in Iraq. But at the same time, I think there are lots of light moments all across, all the way through the book in the character of Tawus, the helper of the grandmother's helper, or in the character of the grandmother herself. So there was this light spirit across that carried through, that with many examples of typical Iraqi personalities in the novel. And and as you said, there is the alter ego who is reminding her, or is sort of trying to push the moral compass of what's happening in Iraq with Zeina, as far as being a traitor or not a traitor, or the struggle that she's going through gets more sort of underscored by this alter ego almost every other chapter. And so although it is about the war, it is at the same time about her identity, the issues that even without the war, if we take the war out, and the fact that Zeina was embedded with the soldiers as a translator, just think of her just going back to visit Iraq after 30 years. And I have a feeling she might be going through these same emotions and with her grandmother, and thinking of herself as an Iraqi, because there is in one of the chapters what happened with the mother who hasn't resolved the issue of being American and being an Arab at the same time, and what her identity is. I think the mother has never resolved that. And so that comes out very strongly in the book. Another point that I thought was endearing to me is in the first chapter, or the second one, the description of the way the Iraqis in the grandmother described how she minces the word, cranks out another word to describe a person. This is so typical of, I have an aunt who's an Iraqi, and for me, that's why all this was so personal. And I also know the author, and that's why I recommended this book, because I felt she did a great job of bringing in this really very Iraqi spirit into the book, with the way she said Zeina, Zainuna, and it just rings so true of the Iraqi dialect. At the same time, there is in this book the love of Iraq. The author is Chaldean, and the main, of course, the family is Chaldean, and the father, Zeina's father is Assyrian, her mother is Chaldean Catholic, and still the description throughout the novel and the references are about the national Iraq as an Arab country. And that's, I think it's important when we think there are over 19 ethnic minorities in Iraq, yet we didn't hear about this conflict until the war started as much as. So I think the reflection through the novel and the references, if you read the book, to her grandfather, who was a soldier in the Iraqi army, and his pride of being a soldier serving Iraq, yet he was Chaldean. So there was no issue there of being a Chaldean and serving in the Iraqi army in the 50s. So I thought that was really an important point that the author maybe intentionally meant to add in the book. So I look at it from a different point of view. I come from the visual arts, and there are many artists in the Arab world who deal with the topics of conflicts and now especially with the Arab Spring. So for me, I was trying to draw parallels between how the artists deal with these topics and how a writer does deal with them. And I've read the book in Arabic, and that's when I fell in love with the book, with the Arabic language. And then I read it in English, so I was trying to do the comparisons, so I was very interested. But I think it's equally strong in English.
I'd like to pick up on this idea of identity that Salwa brings up. I was struck by a particular passage. It comes about 2/3 of the way through the book, when Zeina is hoping still to have a romantic relationship with her milk brother, Muhaymin. And so I'm just going to read you a couple of paragraphs. Muhaymin was astonished by people like me who were able to settle as immigrants. He called us those who changed their skin. I didn't like his rigid judgments, so I protested, I only have one skin. It just has multiple colors. Is your name Zeina or Chameleon? I only know the motherland, and I can't imagine having a step-motherland. I find the idea of a second homeland ridiculous. But the whole world can be your homeland, Zeina says. Haven't you heard the expression, citizen of the world? He looked at me with resigned pity, as if he was watching a straw tossed by the wind and looking for a tree to hang on to. Now, given the work that I do, that phrase, citizen of the world, struck me because it's a reference to the discourse of cosmopolitanism, The idea of the citizen of the world was developed by the Stoic Greek thinkers in probably the 3rd century BC as an alternative to the model of identity which prevailed then. A model that today we would call nationalistic, although then it was rooted in the identity of your city-state, your polis. To be a polis is to be a citizen. The Stoics said, why don't we think of ourselves as citizens of the world who have our primary obligations not to our city-state, but to the world as a whole, to humanity as a whole. And in recent years, this idea of cosmopolitanism has been broadened to become a kind of counterweight not only to the idea of nationalism, which motivates so many of the characters in this book, but also to the idea of what we might think of as universalism, or the idea that we're all the same. For people who think like universalists, the ways in which we are different, the fact that Iraq has 19 different minorities, that's a problem, and you want to solve it because you want to be able to say things about human nature generally. For people who are cosmopolitans, difference is something else. Difference is a kind of opportunity that you want to embrace. It's not just a problem to be solved. And I think that's the discourse that Zeina is pointing to here. With that comes certain other ideas. A cosmopolitan wants to talk. A cosmopolitan wants to engage in conversations. Because the cosmopolitan thinks, we're all fallible human beings. We don't have the right answers all the time. We should learn from other people. Other people may have a better account of the world than we do, or of facts or ideas. So we should listen to them. We should have deep conversations in which we're willing to put some of our central ideas up for grabs, because who knows, we might change our mind if we hear a better idea. Counter-cosmopolitanism is often identified with fundamentalism. And so in this conversation, what you have is someone who is a cosmopolitan, like Zeina, confronting someone who really is not, someone who thinks he has the one way to be in the world and can't understand how other people would want to do anything that's different. And that's a problem for cosmopolitanism. What do you do if your idea is predicated on conversation and talking to other people, and other people don't want to talk back to you? So a cosmopolitan is interested in the fluidity of culture, how culture changes. People who are counter-cosmopolitanism want cultural purity. They want things to stay the same. And I think that's the kind of tension that we have at work here. This book reminds me of lots of books that I've read in American ethnic traditions or in traditions of immigrant writing, where there is a kind of tension between these ideas of cultural purity and cultural change. In the United States fiction from the early part of the 20th century, there was a concept that was called the dual personality, and it was often applied to immigrants. It's a phrase that's very common, for example, in Asian American writing and criticism of Asian American writing. The idea that you had to be either American, purely American, whatever that meant, or Asian. You couldn't be somehow Asian American. That was a kind of split personality. And people who are cosmopolitans, people who I think Zeina starts out to be anyway, are people who don't want to be bound by that kind of either-or logic. They don't want to say, I'm either Asian or American, either Iraqi or American. I want to be a fusion. I want to be Iraqi American. I want my Iraqi to change the idea of what an American is, but still to be authentically American. So instead of having a logic of either-or, we have a logic of both and. And the question I want to pose is this true about the novel? Does Zeina go to Iraq for her tours of duty as a translator with the American Army, with this idea of cultural fluidity in mind, with an idea of cultural change, with the aspiration to have it all, to have both and? And does she return with the same idea, or something happened? Has she, in other words, been forced into a logic of either or by the end? How do we take the ending, the final words that she says about Baghdad? So I want to think a little bit about the model of identity and the constraints on the possibilities for models of identity that this dramatization imposes on us. Thank you.
We've heard about ideas of how you write about war, how you write about writing about war, about identity, and whether maybe we don't necessarily need to think of this as a war novel, but as a novel about identity and the pursuit of identity, about questions of binary identity, fixed identity, fluidity, in terms of thinking about identity and culture. So there's lots to think about, and what I would now invite is questions, comments, questions to each other, questions to our conversation starters. And now is always the moment where I say, who would like to ask a question? Thank you for starting.
I think the let me say the hero here, or Zeina, as you said. I think she's the hero. I'm sorry, I didn't read the novel, but I just discussed with the interpreter here, he read it. I think Zeina is a split self between America and, let me say, Iraq. But the habits in Iraq, or the Arabic habits, totally different from the American one. And here's the split self. I mean, the idea of cosmopolitan, this is like you are beautifying the fact. She is against America in a way, but at the same time, she is not Iraqi. She is lost between America and between Iraqi. And the other thing here, the use of the writer here, some Iraqi slang words, shows that she is still Iraqi. She is not American. And in a way, it is condemnation to America and to the occupation of America to Iraq, in a way, because she was resisting. In your words, you said she was resisting Iraq. The American occupation to Iraq. I mean, some people, they don't consider it occupation, but in fact, it is occupation. It is invading. I mean, let us name everything put the names as they are. So here, the split self, it comes from the habits she learned from her family, which are Iraqi, and the newcomers, let me say, the American ones, which they wanted to dominate, they wanted to impose on others. In a way, I mean, of course, we can see this through the words the writer wrote, which words did she use, and we can apply, or let's say implement the meta-linguistic here, and we can see exactly what does the writer want from this novel. Why did he write this novel? What's the message between this novel? Thank you.
I'm partway through the book, so I got to the part where she's about to visit the grandmother with the soldiers. And I think it's interesting to get the point of view from everyone, because what I would say is, yes, from the beginning of the book, she shows a kind of, well, it couldn't be any other way, a cultural sensitivity, talking to a non-Iraqi friend in the US, trying to explain a word that would take forever and she's too tired. Okay, so recognizing the cultural differences. But at the same time, I would like to say there's something about it in connection with war, because it's not invented drama. I mean, she doesn't dwell on graphics, but I wouldn't say coming of age, but she realizes she's in war when something happens, like viewing someone with a cut throat the next day in an alley. So I think that it's a good idea in reading the book. There are many connections that can be made, and I think the fact that there is this, whatever we call it, because I wouldn't say it's either or, whatever the names are, but the fact that it's such a dramatic setting, and I was thinking maybe the part about stepping aside out of herself was almost disassociating herself, seeing the film of something happen, and every so often that happens. So I find it very interesting to read, and the ironic part is also worth mentioning. I might not have thought of mentioning it myself, but once you brought that up, the speaker in the middle, thank you. It is interesting, and you don't know if it's I wouldn't know if it's a strategy or not, but I think that it's a very rich discussion, so I appreciate, thank you very much for everyone's comments.
No, I just want to say that, I mean, the book has, if it's a matter of writing the book to bring out the occupation, I mean, I don't think that's the sole intention of the book. The author has written other books, and I think she has the style that I was trying to sort of highlight her style. I mean, the story, if you haven't read it, it is definitely about an occupation. So we're not arguing there is an occupation or there isn't an occupation, but rather how she dealt with the story, and the fact that the young girl, Zeina, goes there because it's an opportunity to make to make a very good salary. So in the very beginning, we don't look at it as she is on the side of the Americans, or if it's not a political reason why she joined the army in Baghdad. It was an economical reason. And there is a great stress on her boyfriend. I mean, there's referring to her boyfriend all the time, in the beginning, in the middle, and her writing every night emails to her boyfriend. Yet at the very end of the story, the boyfriend is not there. So, what's important about this is the boyfriend is an American boyfriend, 100% American. But in the end, he doesn't appear. He disappears at the end of the story. So did her alter ego win at the end? Did they take her back? I think she started with no problem. And when she came back, as you were mentioning, became an issue that she had to face and resolve about her background as an Iraqi and seeing what is happening to Iraq and understanding better what her mother meant and her mother felt actually when she swore allegiance to become an American citizen. And that was also an important moment in the book. But what I read a lot of books on war in the region, the Palestinians or Lebanese or Iraqi, but what I liked about this one, there is such a human element there with the family story and the grandfathers and the grandmother. And the grandmother first welcomed Zeina, but then she couldn't hold her emotions and she couldn't see her granddaughter again and told her never to come back again. So I think that also is telling about her, the strength of the grandmother and her convictions, her political and nationalistic convictions, where they stood. So there are many layers in the story, and there is her relationship with her milk brothers, who are one in the Southern Army and the other one not clear what they want to do. So there is conflict, I think, within her as Zeina. There is conflict within the other young people. And there is the conflict that started with the grandmother that the grandmother resolved sort of. At the end, she died, but
Sorry.
So there is multiple stories.
Spoiler, sorry.
I have read the book in Arabic and the novel, and I read the whole novel and I just loved it. And what I saw in it, really, I didn't see a war book. I really saw an identity. Novel of an identity. And one thing that struck me in the style of the writing is that so many ideas that intersects in the novel that I felt like I am in a photography exhibition, looking at snapshots of everything. Zeina is an immigrant, she's an Arab, she's a female, and she's facing that situation in her homeland, and she's a granddaughter, and she's a lot of things. Another thing that I'm still thinking about is her relationship with Muhammad. As a woman that, as independent as Zeina, and she was instating, I'm an American, I'm strong, and I'm independent. And at the end, she falls in love with Muhammad. And the choice of the name too struck me as Muhammad. Choosing that name for a person that she falls in love with as an independent woman, and Muhammad is all controlling. That's the meaning in Arabic. I'm still thinking about that. This is all what I wanted to say about the novel. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually, as people have been talking, I've been wondering, my students will know I think a lot about issues of gender and gender politics, and so I'm thinking about this novel and wondering how or if it would be different if it were American Grandson, right? So what happens by virtue of the fact that this is a novel about a woman going back, and she's a daughter and a granddaughter, and what that does, and the ways in which gender plays a role in shaping the complications that you're talking about, the sense of identity, the idea of Hollywood movies. You know, women aren't supposed to go to war, right? It's only recently that women were in battle and saw combat and so forth. So just thinking about the daughter part, I think, actually, yes.
Going off the idea of gender, I thought it was really interesting about her identity as a woman in the army, because one of the passages near the beginning, it says that you can either be a concubine or a soldier. So that whole idea of sexuality in the army. And the very first female characters, they're tottering around in high heels, and they don't make it through. And even she says when she puts on her military army or her uniform, she feels more in control, more powerful, stronger. Like, there's a passage which says she puts on the jacket and she feels like she has broader shoulders. And then she tries on her grandfather's jacket. So in some ways it's kind of giving her power, but she's also one of the only women in the army, which is why she's secluded and she has her own bedroom. So just thought that identity as a woman in the army as well as just in Iraq and in America was interesting.
I think it's great through how the novel, through little things like that, like those women in the high heels who have a certain idea of what they want to do in the green zone, don't make it through. I'm struck by the extent to which Zeina feels, you might say, the intoxication of power, or learns to use power in casual moments, the power that's conferred by her army uniform. You'll remember there's that scene in the prison she's walking through, and one of the dangerous prisoners makes a threatening gesture. He runs his thumb across her neck and is trying to intimidate her because she's a woman. And Zeina she says, I walked down the hall, I peed, I washed up, and then I got two of my friends to show him what's what. And she didn't feel guilty about it all. So there's ways in which, she is shown to be a complicated character who is corruptible in certain ways. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me about gender in the novel is it's pretty clear, I think, that being a feminist, or at least being a powerful woman, is something that's associated with Americanism, rightly or wrongly, and that the grandmother and her milk brothers see this as a kind of corruption that's set in, something they want to teach her away from. To return to her Iraqi roots is meaning giving up her ideas of being powerful as a woman.
But isn't the grandmother powerful?
I was just going to say that I think Zeina's okay with that, because when she says to Muhammad, she says, I'm willing to throw myself at your feet. And she's willing to give up all this power. So I think that shows that the reconciliation between her two identities, that she can easily flip from the American strong, powerful feminist to her giving up the control to the men around her. So it's a bit of both.
Although I think it's a complicated relationship, right? Because it's precisely in being so forward that she shows herself to be so powerful, and declaring, I want to be subservient at your feet. That is not something that a proper Iraqi woman is supposed to say. And he finds it shocking, and she knows that he's going to find it shocking. And she's quite convinced that she's going to be able to seduce him, and is quite surprised, it struck me, when she isn't. I think the grandmother's power is power in a really, really different way, a way that we might think of as old world and occurring through influence and saints. It's very different from Zeina's attempts at having female power.
I wonder if the love story is actually a form of cosmopolitanism, because maybe if you came from a very American, very feminist standpoint, then she would be disgusted by Muhammad and all their views. So I think of Zeina as someone who can navigate both sides. She does have feminist values, but she can also understand people who come from a different history and a different upbringing. And I relate it in a political way as well, that she can see the very American side, that we're doing something good in Iraq, but she can also understand her past and her grandmother's side. So in all these gender and political issues, Zeina can navigate because she has this dual identity.
I just wanted, in relation to gender, and the mother, Zeina's mother, was a professor and worked full-time. At the same time, she insisted on getting married to her lover, actually. It seems that there was a reference as if they already had a relationship, and that person was a Syrian, and it's still, against all odds, they got married. So I think that that reflects on the strong character and independence of Iraqi women at that period. At the same time, I was struck by Zeina's relationship with the soldiers. It seems the way the author presented that relationship as if it's like going to any office, working. I mean, there wasn't this underlying tension between the fact that she has seen what the soldiers have done outside, yet these are the same soldiers, yet she felt sorry for the loss of the American soldiers, and then she woke up the next day, went as if she's going to an office in a high-rise in New York, and or in Detroit. So it seemed she wanted to separate as if her work from her life, but of course she couldn't do that. But I was struck by this kind of relationship with the soldiers. They were like her colleagues, as if they were colleagues in an office rather than in a war zone.
But again, it seems like that's another idea of this sort of, it's not a Hollywood war movie, it's ordinary, daily, matter of fact, this is our job, day in, day out, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
There's not the sort of Hollywood headlines that you might associate from, we're going behind the front lines or any of that sort of thing. It sort of literalizes it for us, I think, which is an interesting way to go at this idea of how to write a war novel.
I wanted to ask about the writer words, the words she chose in her writing. I mean, you said some of them Iraqi words used in everyday life. I mean, how did the translator, for example, did that in English? What did he do, for example, to show these words? I mean, this is something has connection to language. In fact, there are many Iraqi words, as you said, in this novel. How did the translator cope with that?
Oh, well,
because you understand both languages.
Yes, but in the end, at the end of the book here, there is a list of the translations. There are 2 pages. That's one thing, okay? But in some of them, she does describe the accent, the Iraqi accent, very clearly, and how there is, for example, khala. And she said how there is khala, how the Iraqis would say khala. And there are other words that we know as Arabs are typically, khala, exactly. And so she does give a few examples of these, but not necessarily, like the author doesn't try to even focus at all on the fact that they come from a Chaldean origin. And Chaldean, they're not speaking Chaldean, she's not using any of that. It's all about the Iraqi personality, which I found very interesting for, in this context.
I read somewhere that when you read this book in Arabic versus reading it in English, it has a very different power, a different sort of sensibility. And I don't know if you can speak to that, Salwa, or if somebody else who read it in Arabic could talk about that at all?
Well, anyone else has read it in 2 languages? Honestly, I read it in Arabic in 2010 when it first came out. All right, but I remember I fell in love with that book, and when I found out it was translated, I suggested the book. So, but I thought I enjoyed reading it again in English, and it's wonderful to be able to read both languages. There is a point I wanted just to make, that the first chapter in the book talks about the sorrow and the pain. And so it's sort of, the ending is set in the beginning, in the first chapter of the book. I found that interesting, don't you? And so, and there is a reference to that also in the novel when the grandmother says, when we meet together, we talk about war, the sorrows of war and loss. As if we pass our time just by talking about these sort of very sad episodes in our lives. It seems the story of the Iraqis. That's what they do when they meet. They just talk about the loss of loved ones, or those who have immigrated, and the loneliness and all that. And in the beginning, this is what the grandmother said. Yet in the beginning of the story, we have the ending, actually, that now the granddaughter is like her grandmother in a way. She's feeling back in the United States with her family, yet she didn't run into the arms of her American lover. She's by herself, and she as if she has inherited this sadness, this chain that at one point was around the neck of that person. Remember in that example of the chain, and that she can't take off anymore.
In my reading at the end of the first chapter, I think and I'd be curious to know if this is the same in Arabic. She talks about her beautiful sorrow and how it's become the thing that she wouldn't give up even though it's painful. She says, "My beautiful sorrow, which makes me feel that I am no longer an ordinary American, but a woman from a faraway and ancient place, her hand clutching the burning coal of a story like no other." But she doesn't say, "I am no longer an American."
No.
She says, "I am no longer an ordinary American." And to me, that is in some sense a figuration of a kind of both and. Her Americanness has been changed. It's still Americanness, but it's been profoundly changed by her experience of refinding herself as an Iraqi.
Right. And then she also says, yes, I like this sorrow of mine. I feel the softness of its gravel as I wade with bared soul into its fountain, and I have no desire to shake off its burden. My beautiful sorrow, which makes me feel that I am no longer an ordinary American, like you said. So she is dwelling in this, on this sorrow and happy to live in it, I guess.
If she's holding onto the sorrow, and like you said, the sorrow is something she may have inherited from the Iraqi people, then I think, you know, we can say that you don't have to be either American or Iraqi. You can be both, but I've always been confused by what it means to be both. I think when you were both, you were still missing out on a lot. So I don't think she just went to war for economical reasons, but because she wanted to fill in that gap somehow. And that gap clearly it has something to do with her family history. So even though she comes back with something so sad, this sorrow that's painful for her, she may have filled out more of the gaps in her identity, but there is still something missing always. She can't be ordinary American, she can't be fully American in some way, nor fully Iraqi. So I think that may be what it means to be both.
I just want to answer really fast your question about reading the novel in Arabic. I really advise everybody who can read in Arabic to read it in Arabic because it's really beautiful. And what I enjoyed in this novel is that the writer not mixed, but introduced the spoken varieties in Iraq. She introduced the Baghdadi dialect or the spoken variety in Baghdad versus the spoken variety in Al-Mosul, and then she used the many poetry from classical Arabic in her writing. So it was really beautiful. I don't know how would that translate into English because you're not going to be able to see the differences between the different varieties that she used. It was really beautiful. Thank you.
So it's almost as if there are more voices in the Arabic version, if you think about all the different dialects. Is that?
Even within Iraq, and she even used or she cited words in the Chaldean or the Assyrian in the prayer. So she had so many varieties of Arabic inside the novel.
I thought that the way the author talked about, I guess, uniform or clothing was very interesting, and I guess I wanted to, if you guys have any specific thoughts on that. I found it interesting that at the end she, I think, threw away the uniform that she had, and also the circumstances for which she was in Iraq. It would have been very different if she hadn't gone as a soldier, because that meant every time she went out, she was very visibly marked as an American, and then when she put on the abaya, she was seen like by the taxi driver as just, he didn't even know that she was American. So I don't know what you thought about the use of costume, I guess.
I would, to me, the ending, there's a double thing that's going on. It's about her father, right? Because her father preserves the uniform. He's proud of the uniform. Part of what he feels that he's lost when he had to leave Iraq is this connection that he had to a patriotic version of Iraq. She doesn't feel that about the United States. She gets rid of the uniform and doesn't want to preserve it. And she says, the last thing that she says in the novel is that she wants to remember the thing that her father says. So she doesn't bring back any keepsakes at all. She doesn't have any talismanic objects. She just wants to have memory. She says, I just repeat after my father, I'd give my right hand if I should ever forget you, Baghdad. So I think that's what I take. I mean, I think they've made a big deal about the father's uniform. So her gesture of not preserving her uniform or any kind of keepsakes, I think, is symbolically in reference to that earlier way of being.
I think clothing could also speak to how she's sometimes called a chameleon. So when she's wearing the abaya, the driver completely believes that she's local Iraqi. When she puts on the uniform, her grandma can't stand to see her because she's too affiliated with the US Army. And then that made me think about what Muhammad said about how you're changing skins, or
Chameleon, right?
yeah. He accuses her of that. And she tries to say that, no, I still have the same skin, it's just different colors. But when she does change clothes, she's putting on a completely new identity each time.
Everyone is commenting about how the grandmother is looking at the daughter as the soldier, the American soldier. But I don't know if I never read the book, but I don't know if in the book they talk about how the Americans look at the lady as an Iraqi, or perhaps how you think of it.
Well, how the American soldiers look at the Arab ladies, Iraqi ladies?
Iraq, or the grandmother in particular? How the soldiers... Well, I mean, one of the funny, quote-unquote, funny aspects of this, or you might say it's kind of black humor, is that her commanding officer is very sympathetic to, he has his own grandmother who dies in the course of the novel, so he's very sympathetic to her desire to reconnect, but they can't let her go to visit her grandmother, it's not safe. So they orchestrate a raid on her neighborhood and then on her grandmother's house, and that way they can be there because these raids take a couple of hours, so they go, and she's there, and she's able to have this visit. So in a certain way, they're very sympathetic to what she's trying to do. Of course, that puts the grandmother in a terrible position. I mean, it makes it even worse, and it makes it clear that her granddaughter is associated with the Americans. I don't remember the soldiers, that the novel stressing that the soldiers have a particular point of view about Iraqi women, other than the one that was already mentioned about women more generally in this theater of war, that, you know, if the soldiers regarded women as potential concubines unless they regarded them as soldiers. But that didn't seem pointedly about Iraq. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, there was one American soldier who was in love, or thought he was maybe in love with an Iraqi. Was it she Iraqi or
yeah,
Egyptian?
I don't think she was Iraqi.
She was Iraqi, and the author tried, I mean, there is an insinuation that she probably wanted just to get married to him to get the green card and make it across to the
If it's
US.
the one I'm thinking of, it doesn't go well with her.
No, I don't know. Isn't that true? Not Zeina. I'm talking
No, the other one. The boyfriend leaves, and then she is treated as a collaborator.
Yeah, then she's killed. Yeah.
I mean, she's put in a funny position, right? As you said, there's almost like this is her job. She hangs out with all these soldiers. They become kind of her friends, for better or worse. They're soldiers. There are a couple of scenes you'll see in the novel if you get to read it, where she goes along with them, and it's a kind of very strange situation. She's not allowed in every place. There are certain rules for what a translator is allowed to do, and it's pretty clear that they are looking for people that really are bad people, that are terrorists. But in the course of doing that, there's a lot of collateral damage. So there's one really moving scene in which somebody is misidentified and is humiliated, and she is therefore complicit with all of this. And yet, the other thing that starts to happen as she stays there longer is that these people who are in the army, who are our friends, start to die. They start to be found dead. They are blown up. So the whole experience for her is in some sense very debilitating. The sorrow is very complicated. It is not only about, I think, the grandmother and only about Iraq. It's about many things that the terrible nature of war brings out.